So, I know I've been talking about doing the older school poetry videos, but the other day I was spending some time with a friend of mine. We were looking for a place to get our parking validated, and we were told that a place where we could get it validated was Barnes & Noble. And so of course that meant that I had to walk into the bookstore and buy a book, because I can't walk into any bookstore without buying a book. And so I got this book, Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur, and as you can probably tell, I've already thumbed through it quite a few times. A lot of you who, well, I should say, a lot of people have probably seen this or are familiar with poems in this book. It is a New York Times bestseller, which is not a thing for very many poetry books, so that's pretty exciting. Also exciting, if you can't tell by the name, Rupi Kaur is an Indian woman. She's Punjabi, and so some of her poems reference this. Most of it, though, is about growing up, love, loss, breakup, coming to terms with yourself, sort of as a woman. Also, a lot of it is about her experiences of abuse, both throughout childhood and in relationships. So, right off the bat, I want to give you guys a content warning, because some of this stuff cuts deep. It's very simple, very short poems. Like, you can, this is the sort of style of a very short poem, sometimes with a picture, sometimes without. And this kind of poetry is the stuff that, well, I should say the poems, just the straight up pictures from the book, get shared on social media a lot. I see them everywhere. And because they are so short and sweet, they often get put on like nice pictures, like a picture of a sunset or something like that, and then shared around. They're not always attributed to her, especially since a lot of these pages, like it's the poem and the picture, and it doesn't really have her name, unless, it's up at the top, of course, but quite often it's cut out. So there is quite the possibility that you might be familiar with some of these poems and not even know it. You might have seen it on Facebook or Tumblr or wherever it passes around and not even know who it belongs to, or rather belongs to who wrote it. Second or third thing about this is the way that it's separated. There are 4 parts: the hurting, the loving, the breaking, and the healing. And so, basically, I just noticed this other thing. Basically, those are what each is about. So the first part is about, hurting, and a little bit of it, quite a bit of it is growing up, and sort of the pain of that. The loving, which is partly familial and partly romantic love. The breaking, sort of, a lot of the breakup poems are there. And the healing, which is where a lot of her, healing, the more motivational stuff sits there. So, sorry about that. This is the quietest that my house has been all day. So, this is why I have to film late at night with a bright light on me. And unfortunately, I live too close to a busy area, so it's going to be a lot harder to have silence. Anyway, I just noticed that across from the contents it says, "My heart woke me crying last night. How can I help?" I begged. My heart said, "Write the book." so much of it is written like this. I mean, even the back is a poem. This is the journey of surviving through poetry. This is the blood, sweat, tears of 21 years. This is my heart in your hands. This is the hurting, the loving, the breaking, the healing. By Rupi Kaur. So, anyway, let's get started. I thumbed through this book, and as you can see, I marked a lot of poems. So I don't know if I'll get through them all, but they are short, so hopefully I will. And if I have to make this video longer than normal to get through all these poems, I will, because, like, this, let me just say this, I've struggled to do a lot of good writing, and then I read this, and I feel like I brought my muse back, so this is really good stuff. It touches you in an interesting way. So, Milk and Honey. So the first poem, we're starting off with the hurting. So, again, this stuff's gonna cut deep, and if you would rather look up her poetry yourself, that might be easier than hearing it. If you are afraid of hearing something that is going to trigger you, or if you are not in a good place to be cut in that sort of emotional way. Okay, so the first poem sort of explains why the book is called Milk and Honey, and she references milk and honey throughout a number of poems, but this one is my favorite. How is it so easy for you to be kind to people? He asked. Milk and honey dripped from my lips as I answered, 'cause people have not been kind to me. It's so simple. It's so simple. Okay, so this next one is kind of about abuse. Every time you tell your daughter you yell at her out of love, you teach her to confuse anger with kindness, which seems like a good idea till she grows up to trust men who hurt her because they look so much like you. It says, to fathers with daughters. So none of these really have titles up at the top, you'll notice, but some of them have these kind of like post-titles at the bottom. Then there's a picture of a young girl, which is sort of what I imagine that Rupi must have looked like as a young girl. Okay, there is. Trying to convince myself I am allowed to take up space is like writing with my left hand when I was born to use my right. The idea of shrinking is hereditary. There's just this empty chair. So you can kind of see how this is pretty painful stuff. This in particular is a thing that I feel like a lot of women from cultures that tell women to be quiet and keep to themselves probably can relate to. A lot of women of color can relate to a lot of the stuff in this book, and I'm sure even, I'm sure it's not just women of color who can relate to this sort of thing. I know, just as there's the phrase, women should be seen and not heard, the same is often said about children, so. Okay. Emptying out of my mother's belly was my first act of disappearance. Learning to shrink for a family who likes their daughters invisible was the second. The art of being empty is simple. Believe them when they say you are nothing. Repeat it to yourself like a wish. I am nothing. I am nothing. I am nothing. So often, the only reason you know you're still alive is from the heaving of your chest. This one is the art of being empty. It's a skeleton. I like how the pictures seem to really complement the poetry, and like it adds to the kind of feeling that comes across with the poem. Okay, so I think that is the last one from the hurting. Next is the loving. So these are going to be quite a bit nicer. don't know if any of the poems that I marked have sexual content, but a lot of the poems in her book have sexual content, starting from the section The Loving, because, of course. So, fair warning, because, like I said, I don't remember. I tried not to mark anything that was too sexual, but, well, it's a part of life. When my mother was pregnant with her second child, I was 4. I pointed at her swollen belly, confused at how my mother had gotten so big in such little time. My father scooped me in his tree-trunk arms and said the closest thing to God on earth is a woman's body. It's where life comes from. And to have a grown man tell me something so powerful at such a young age changed me to see the entire universe rested at my mother's feet. There's this picture, which is just so powerful linked with this poem. Okay. I think I probably dog-eared more poems from this section than any other, just because I like the happy poems. Okay, this one is quite simple. You are the faint line between faith and blindly waiting. Letter to my future lover. Which I think is how a lot of us feel when we haven't met anyone. There's the sort of, you know, someday I'll find someone, but is that a hope? Or is that true? Okay. Oh, here's another one. He says, I am sorry, I am not an easy person to want. I looked at him surprised. Who said I wanted easy? I don't crave easy. I crave goddamn difficult. I really like this one because it highlights the idea that love doesn't always come easy. Sometimes it's hard, and sometimes that's good that it's hard, because if it was too easy, usually that means something's wrong. Something's not being talked about. But this could also be a thing where, certain people like some argument in their relationships, like Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet style. So, here's another good one. I do not want to have you to fill the empty parts of me. I want to be full on my own. I want to be so complete I could light a whole city, and then I want to have you, because the two of us combined could set it on fire. There are 2 light bulbs, one for each of them. And I really like this idea because it sort of goes against the standard idea that your soulmate or whoever should complete you, but instead this is saying that you should be a complete person on your own and then create something magical with another complete person. Okay. And I think, is that the last one? Or is there another one in this section? This is the last one in that section. Okay, cool. And next is the breaking, which is another pretty painful one. I do like how she split this up, where there's like pain and then healing and then pain and then more healing, so that you end with the healing, but it's still like sort of distributed. Okay. This one is a bit longer than the others, so let me see, how can I hold it up? There. You said if it is meant to be, fate will bring us back together. For a second, I wonder if you are really that naive, if you really believe fate works like that, as if it lives in the sky staring down at us, as if it has 5 fingers and spends its time placing us like pieces of chess, as if it is not the choices we make. Who taught you that? Tell me, who has convinced you? You've been given a heart and a mind that isn't yours to use, that your actions do not define what will become of you. I want to scream and shout, It's us, you fool. We are the only ones that can bring us back together. But instead I sit quietly, smiling softly through quivering lips, thinking, isn't it such a tragic thing when you can see it so clearly but the other person doesn't? So I like this because it mentions a couple of things that I really like. One is the idea of fate being a being who is physically maneuvering things, which some people believe that to be the case. Other people don't. And I don't really see it that way, so I really felt like I could relate to the speaker on this one. And secondly, the last bit, isn't it such a tragic thing when you can see it so clearly but the other person doesn't? Which I think applies to this, but also applies to so many other things. Applies to so many other things. I'm sure everyone has had someone who they're very close to where there's a fundamental disagreement on something. Whether it's, in this case, it seems to be spiritual religion, politics, science, whatever it is. Someone who you love and care about very deeply, who doesn't see something that you see as true, or just doesn't understand things the way you do, and it just feels painful. Okay, here's another short one. You whisper, I love you. What you mean is, I don't want you to leave. So I have a poem that this reminds me of. There's a poem that I wrote called When Not to Say I Love You, which I've read in a video a long time ago, probably about a year and a half ago, one of my old poetry videos with the little green notebook, for those of you who've been with me long enough to remember that notebook, which is coming back, by the way. But anyway, it is because there are so many times when we use the words I love you, and that's not actually the sentiment we're trying to get across. So, in this case, it's saying I love you when you don't want someone to leave. Maybe when maybe when there's a breakup going on, and this is called the breaking, so I imagine that's what is going on, but I can also see it being a sorry about that. That was my housemates. But just as I was about to go out and ask them to quiet down, my fiance went out and did that for me, so that's really sweet of him. Anyway, basically, this is a good summary of one of the 5 parts. There are lots of times when this phenomenon happens, when you're saying I love you and that's not the thing you mean, but anyway, you guys can go over and watch that video where I read that poem if you're interested. Yeah, I think the other thing about this poem, not only that it made me think of my own poem, but the fact that happened sort of furthered the idea that, okay, there are lots of things that I notice that she also notices and writes in her poetry that I also write in my poetry. And so it's very interesting. I feel like Rupi Kaur and I have similar styles. Okay, this one is heavy. This is another one that feels like a thing that I could have written, or the kind of thing that I write. So this one comes with a picture. Did you think I was a city big enough for a weekend getaway? I am the town surrounding it, the one you've never heard of but always pass through. There are no neon lights here, no skyscrapers or statues, but there is thunder, for I make bridges tremble. I am not not street meat, I am homemade jam, thick enough to cut the sweetest thing your lips will touch. I am not police sirens, I am the crackle of a fireplace. I'd burn you and you still couldn't take your eyes off me, 'cause I'd look so beautiful doing it, you'd blush. I'm not a hotel room, I am home. I'm not the whiskey you want, I am the water you need. Don't come here with expectations and try to make a vacation out of me. There's so much power in the way that she writes, especially with the way that she writes pain. It feels like, it feels like she's so sure of herself that she can go through pain and not feel like she deserves the pain, if that makes sense. There are poems in here where she admits to having wronged people, and there are poems in here where she so deftly points out exactly what the other person did in the relationship that went wrong. There are poems where she says, yeah, we both messed up, and I'm sorry. So, and I mean, this was, she says 21 years, so I think she was 21 when she wrote this. I think she actually isn't, she's about my age, like, mid-20s, so it's kind of incredible that she had that level of wisdom at 21. I mean, I don't know that I did. Okay, this one is one that I like a lot. You treat them like they have a heart like yours, but not everyone can be as soft and tender. You don't see the person they are, you see the person they have the potential to be. You give and give till they pull everything out of you and leave you empty. I feel like I can relate to that a lot. Especially you don't see the person they are, you see the person they have the potential to be. I think that ability is what made me want to become a therapist. Seeing potential in people, seeing good in people, and wanting people to realize that themselves, to realize how good they are. Okay. Here's another one. I don't know what living a balanced life feels like. When I'm sad, I don't cry, I pour. When I'm happy, I don't smile, I glow. When I'm angry, I don't yell, I burn. The good thing about feeling in extremes is when I love, I give them wings. But perhaps that isn't such a good thing, because they always tend to leave. And you should see me when my heart is broken. I don't grieve, I shatter. And here, it looks like broken pieces of a teacup, which just so perfectly, shattered pieces, really, right? And it sort of intensifies the feeling of it, I guess. Especially because that ending punches you, and then you see the shattered pieces. I imagine people who are far more visual can get a lot out of the pictures, like emotionally relating to pictures, and that helps them relate to the poem. So this one is good. I will not have you build me into your life when what I want is to build a life with you. The difference. This is just tools for building things. This is a thing that I have talked to friends about with their partners, where there is a difference between wanting to build a life together with someone and wanting to find a person who has a space in your life as it exists. There are some kinds of people who want the kind of life partner where they can build something together. It's the two of them. You can sort of imagine, especially people who meet very young, and very, very young, that can often be what it looks like for them because they're sort of discovering themselves and discovering what their needs are and deciding things together. And sometimes, especially when, someone gets married later in life, or if someone, does the thing of, I'm going to decide my career and my lifestyle and then get married, it becomes a matter of finding someone to suit their lifestyle. Someone who is, say, a big CEO of business and feels like, okay, I have enough money, I'm good, now I want to find my life partner. Well, he needs to find someone who suits his lifestyle, because he isn't going to stop being the CEO of his business just because the person who he's dating, like, it doesn't work. Or, if his business is in New York, he's not going to move somewhere else for someone. So, I think it's often just really sad when two people who love each other very much are on different sides of this, because it's kind of one of those cases where sometimes it doesn't really matter how much you love each other, but sometimes it's just not going to work. And that really sucks. Okay. Now, after all that breaking, we have the healing. This is where you might recognize some of her more motivational poems. I think I only have a few left. Okay. Stay strong through your pain. Grow flowers from it. You have helped me grow flowers out of mine, so bloom beautifully, dangerously, loudly. Bloom softly, however you need. Just bloom. This is to the reader. There are quite a few of these. There are a couple at the end that are about creating art that are pretty much just like, write, create art, do what you need to do. Don't feel self-conscious about the things you create. So I like that she has little poems through this that are specifically addressed to the reader. Especially in this end, the healing part, because those are more motivational. Excuse me. Oh, this is one that, even though it's on the healing, it kind of hurts. You tell me I am not like most girls, and learn to kiss me with your eyes closed. Something about the phrase, something about how I have to be unlike the women I call sisters in order to be wanted, makes me want to spit your tongue out, like I am supposed to be proud you picked me, as if I should be relieved you think I am better than them. So, that's something I've heard from people. Not necessarily people, guys. But there are a lot of these little things that you don't notice as being hurtful, and saying that you're not like other girls is like an insult to other girls, essentially. Oh, here is a pretty popular one. The next time he points out the hair on your legs is growing back, remind that boy your body is not his home. He is a guest. Warn him to never outstep his welcome again. And then this picture, which is amazing. The idea of the body being a garden. Rupi Kaur has a few poems like this. She is very pro body hair. Provided, of course. And she has another poem that says, do what you want to do with it. If you want to grow out your body hair, then grow out your body hair. If you want to shave it, then shave it. But nobody should have to do something like that just because they feel like they have to, which I feel like is very true. There are a lot of little things like this that we feel like we have to do that are not necessarily things that we have to do, little things. I have a friend who eats pizza with a knife and fork. People look at her weird because you're supposed to eat pizza with your hands, but who says? Okay, here is another good one. Our backs tell stories no books have the spine to carry. This is titled Women of Color, but that picture where, she's standing upright and strong. And this one says women of color, but I mean, there are so many people who this applies to, not always just women of color. I know plenty of people who do not identify as women who this could apply to. And people who are not people of color who this identifies as. So I think it's powerful pointing in that direction, though, especially because, Rupi Kaur being a woman of color, that's the experience that she speaks for. Sort of. Not that she speaks for all women of color, but anyway. You were a dragon long before he came around and said you could fly. You will remain a dragon long after he's left. There are a couple poems that say this basic thing, but the sort of idea that, if someone can point out how great you are, and when they're not around, you are still that great. You are still that awesome and smart and beautiful and talented. Speaking of beautiful, this is another very popular one. I want to apologize to all the women I have called pretty before I've called them intelligent or brave. I am sorry I made it sound as though something as simple as what you're born with is the most you have to be proud of when your spirit has crushed mountains. From now on, I will say things like, you are resilient, or you are extraordinary. Not because I don't think you're pretty, but because you are so much more than that. The mountains. This is another one that really has made me think of the way that I talk to people and compliment them. I like to do this thing where I try and think of a thing that a person clearly cares about but probably doesn't get complimented on that much, So like a very smart girl might get told that she's smart a lot, but might not get told that